Sure, thanks. Yeah, so thanks for having me, FTD, and React Chicago. I really appreciate you having me here tonight to talk. You could be anywhere in the whole world, you're here, so thank you. I live in Mississippi. I'm a developer advocate for AWS Mobile, and I work remotely. So part of my job is actually doing conferences and meetups. I do a lot of blogging, I do a lot of writing, documentation, and being on GitHub, and a lot of just non-coding stuff like I used to do. So I can kind of talk about what I've been working on the last few months and what we're doing like at AWS. I'll talk a little bit about what I did before I joined AWS, and then I'll kind of do a demo, and I might do a few slides. I'm not big on slides, but I'll do a few slides, and then a bit of a live demo, kind of showing off what we're working on. So before I started with AWS, I was running a company called React Native Training, and we still have React Native Training. It's been going on for about 2 years now. We've been all around the world training companies like Intuit, Microsoft, Amazon, even Facebook on how to build mobile apps using React Native. Because a lot of these companies have skilled people there that are actually building React Native that are probably better than we are as trainers, but they're too busy doing what they're doing for work, so training is like a big business and stuff. So we got into that almost 2 years ago, and we've been doing that for about 2 years now. But about 8 or 9 months, I joined AWS as a developer advocate, working on a small team within AWS. It's called AWS Mobile, but it's really that's not a good name for our team anymore because we're doing something different these days. We're still focused on mobile, but generally we have a lot of interesting things going on, I guess you would say, where we're really trying to bring increased developer productivity, developer velocity, developer efficiency, whatever you'd like to call it, and help people build full-stack cloud-enabled applications much easier than ever before. And recently we released the AWS Amplify CLI, and we've had the AWS Amplify library that's been around for almost a year now, and that's kind of what I'm going to be going over. But essentially, we're building a lot of tooling that allows you to build these full stack applications as a single developer or a small team to kind of be working from your front end environment, but also building these cloud and managed services without really having to leave your front end environment. So a lot of times when people think of AWS, they don't think of front end. Most of the time when you think of AWS, you think of servers and server-side development and infrastructure and things like that. I think now with all of the levels of abstraction that keep being created, a lot of these managed services are now accessible to front-end developers, and that's really the core of what we're trying to do. We want to make it easy for front-end developers to use their existing skill set. You don't have to learn anything else, just know JavaScript or know Objective-C or whatever you're used to working in, and understand the command line a little bit, and you're able to build full-stack apps. So I'll go ahead and get to some of my slides real quick and kind of go over what we're going to be doing. So yeah, that's me. I'm a developer advocate. If you look at our documentation, this is kind of what we call Amplify. And Amplify really has two parts. It has this is kind of, did everyone hear me okay? Okay, there we go. Amplify has two main parts. There's the CLI, which is kind of the command line interface, and then there's the client-side library. So we're going to be looking at both of those. But if you look at our documentation, description that we have is a CLI toolchain, client library, UI component library that enables developers to quickly and easily build full-stack, cloud-powered web and mobile applications. And even though that's kind of a long description, that's a pretty precise description about like what we're doing. And again, our team is focused on one thing really, and that's developer velocity. We're trying to we want to make it faster and easier for developers to build out their entire application, test out things, experiment. If something works, that's great. If it doesn't, at least you haven't spent a lot of money and a lot of time trying it out. One of the other services that goes along with Amplify, and something we're going to look at, is AWS AppSync. And AWS AppSync is a managed GraphQL service, and it's actually more of like a managed data layer, you could think of it as. GraphQL just happens to be the implementation. So if you've ever worked with something like Firebase, this is a very similar idea. where you don't have to worry about building, maintaining, deploying your infrastructure and your back end. You just spin up a server and you're automatically given a few endpoints. You can start submitting, put, get requests, whatever, start adding things to your database. You don't have to worry about it scaling, it scales for you. What AppSync does though, it allows you to use any data source that you like, and you end up having a GraphQL API layer in front of all of those data sources. So right now we have first-class data sources for AppSync that are DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL database. We have Elasticsearch. We have Lambda functions, which are basically serverless functions. We also have HTTP endpoints. So if you have an existing GraphQL endpoint, you can easily turn that into a GraphQL API. And then we actually are seeing people build any type of data source that they like using a Lambda function. So if you have a SQL or a Aurora database or an RDS database or whatever database you have, MongoDB, you can use a resolver that ends up being a Lambda function that ends up working with the data source and bringing your code back. So you end up being able to use any data source, so you're not restricted to a certain database implementation like you may be with other similar services. And with Amplify, there are over 100 different services with AWS that we offer, but with Amplify, we're focusing on a small set of those, at least at first. So right now with Amplify, you can enable authentication, analytics, GraphQL, and REST APIs, Lambda functions, chatbots, storage, internationalization, which is more like a local thing. And a few days ago, we just added a way to embed AR, VR scenes from Amazon Sumerian into your apps using the Amplify library. And using the Amplify CLI, you can actually enable all these services from your command line. So not only are you able to use the actual service that's already created in your account, you can actually create the service from your command line in your account, and that's what we're going to do in the demo I'm going to show in just a minute. So to get started, there's really like 5 steps. I'm going to share these slides, but all this stuff is actually in the documentation. You install the Amplify CLI, you configure the CLI to use an AWS user from your account, you initialize a new Amplify project, and then you can start adding new features. So you would basically initialize the Amplify app, and then you would say Amplify add authentication or Amplify add API, so on and so forth. And then once the feature's been added, you can start using it in your GraphQL, in your application. So with the whole topic of, or this meetup is a React meetup. One of the cool things about AWS Amplify is that we have first-class component libraries for different frameworks. And one of the frameworks that we really are focused on is React and React Native. So we have these pre-configured components that will scaffold out things like an entire authentication flow, photo pickers, chatbots, all these different things that typically would probably take hundreds of lines of code, because not only are you writing out the design and stuff, you're also writing out functionality. You can use, in a couple of lines of code, you can scaffold out some of these pieces of functionality if you're using either React, Vue, Angular, or React Native. And we're going to be using AWS Amplify React and the Amplify library, and we're going to be doing this inside of the React project. So that's kind of the whole gist of it as far as my intro goes. I'm going to now be doing a lot of demo and stuff, but before I get started, I wanted to know if anyone has any general questions about anything at all before we get started. Yes?
So I used Amplify before for the storage, specifically just uploading to S3. But while I was using the CLI, I didn't really understand how that would scale to a team of developers or even multiple people in terms of installs and the credentials and whatnot. Can you touch on that as you go?
Yeah, so I can touch on that now. I would say what people are doing now with Amplify. So Amplify was just released a few weeks ago. We had something that was similar. It was called the AWS Mobile.
That's what it was.
So that was really hard to do. We're working with teams and keeping your configuration and your GitHub account and understanding what was going on. Amplify uses something called CloudFormation, and really, like, you can have a whole team of developers using the same project, and then you make a change, And the actual change gets changed in the cloud formation, so you don't really actually have to look at it. And then you can just push it up to your GitHub account, and then the other people can pull it down. And then you have consistency across all the teams. So that's kind of the flow there with working with teams.
Okay, so thanks.
Any other questions? Who here has used AWS services, just out of curiosity? Out of everyone that's here that's used like AWS services, what do you use to configure your projects locally? Do you use something like Serverless framework or SAM or something like that? Or is it more just building your infrastructure and not really keeping anything local? Does anyone have any experience with serverless? Yeah, serverless. Cool. So like a lot of people that could have used serverless framework to manage like their Lambda functions, you can actually use Amplify to do that now. It's just, I would say the main difference is with the serverless framework, you have to keep up with a lot of configuration files, a lot of YAML files. And what we're focusing on with Amplify is that having really, you don't really have to go into your YAML files and your configuration files hardly at all. Everything is done through the command line. So you can run commands and check and see what's going on and then add, update, and delete things directly from your command line. So I don't like working with those configuration files at all. That's why I really like this. So, but anyway, I'll go ahead and start the demo. So this is going to be a bunch of live coding, but I think it should go pretty fast. So we'll see. So what I have here is a React project. So I'm just going to go ahead and run npm start and take a quick look at it. And right now there's really nothing in this project. It's just a basic React project. And I'm going to go ahead and inspect. And let me make this a little bigger. And I know that we're going to be presenting on, this isn't like directly live, so it might be a little bit of delay, but I'll try to take some pauses and stuff. And if I have going too fast or anything, or anyone has any questions, feel free to stop me. So we have a React app. What we want to do is we want to add Amplify and start using some of these services. So I'm in the root of the project here. I'm just going to make this a little bigger. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize a new project by running Amplify init.
Does it matter what version of Amplify you're on there? Should you be installing it locally to each project as a dev dependency?
No, you should probably be installing it globally. Yeah. So no, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to break between versions. It'll just be, we'll just add new things probably to newer versions.
Okay.
So it's going to ask me for a few different questions, like my default code editor, and then JavaScript, React, source directory, distribution directory, build command. All this stuff is actually usually guessed for you based on the framework that you're using. And it's asking us if you want to use an existing AWS profile. When you run this for the first time, you actually have to go create a profile. Since I've already done this before, I'm going to choose the region that I want. So I'm going to choose US East 2. And this is going to go ahead and create that project for me. So while that's running, I'm going to open another window and I'm going to go ahead and install some dependencies. So let me open this up in a new terminal window actually. So what we need to do just to kind of get started is we need to add AWS Amplify React. And while that's installing, I'm going to go ahead back to where we installed the Amplify project, and now you'll see that we have a couple of new files. We have this Amplify folder. This holds a lot of our code that's going to be generated by the CLI. And then we also have this .amplify.rc. Neither one of these you really have to update yourself. These are pretty much maintained for you by the CLI. In the Amplify folder, we might be doing a little bit of changes in things like our GraphQL schema, but for the most part, most of this just doesn't really get edited too much. So now that the Amplify project is there, we're ready to go ahead and start adding some services. So to do that, I can just run Amplify add. And the first thing I like to show off is the Authentication service, because to do other stuff like storage with S3, we need authentication anyway. So I might as well just go ahead and add that. And We have two options. We can either use a default configuration setting or we can set up our own. I'm just going to use the default. And now that the actual service has been configured locally, we now need to actually create it in our account. So Amplify app will create some resources for us using CloudFormation locally. And then when we run Amplify push, it'll actually take that CloudFormation template and create it in our account.
The top line and bottom line covered by some items there. So if you could type in
okay,
that
thank
would be
you.
helpful.
So let me, so there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and run Amplify push there. And this will go ahead and create the resources. So it's asking me if this operation create is okay, because the three different types of operations are going to be either create, update, or delete. So create, since this is the first time we're doing that. So that's going to go ahead and create the project in our account, or the actual service, which is the authentication service. So while that's happening, I'm going to go to the React app here, and we need to do two things. First of all, at the root of the project, we need to let React know that Amplify has been installed, a new project has been created, and we need to pass in some configuration. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and import Amplify from the Amplify library. We're going to be having a new configuration that's created for us called AWS exports. So I'll go ahead and import that. And I'll call that config. And then I'm going to call amplify.configure. And then I'll pass in the config. And that is the root setup. So once that's set up, we can actually go anywhere in the app and start using Amplify.
If you wanted to configure Amplify services with a specific IAM role or per environment or something, is there a way to do that?
So the Amplify CLI.
I don't know, if you want your like CloudFormation configurations to live under a specific IAM group or something.
Yeah, you can do that. You would basically create a user that has those credentials, and then anyone using the CLI for that project would just create a user, or they would create a configuration that references that user. So you would just run amplify configure, and then you would just be able to add like a new user with those credentials.
Oh.
And then you could just choose that user whenever you're ready.
All right, cool.
So.
Are you using the default configuration here in these lines that you showed?
Let's see here. In this code here?
Yes. Is it default configuration?
The full configuration?
Yes. Or you may actually change this configuration.
Oh, so the configuration is maintained by the CLI. So let's go ahead and look at that config. Let's see here. Once this service has been created, see this takes about a minute or so. So now that it's created this config right here. And this is what I imported to use. So it gives us our project region, our Cognito identity, full ID, and all this stuff referencing Cognito is the authentication service. So Amazon has a authentication service that's called Cognito. If you've ever used something like Auth0 or something like that, it's basically a managed authentication service, similar to that. But you don't really have to, in fact, you don't ever edit this file here. This file is maintained completely by the CLI. So we imported Amplify from the Amplify library, we imported that config, and then we just call amplify.configure at the root of the project, and this will configure everything. So now, if we go ahead and reload the app, looks like that error went away, so that's good. So now we can start actually doing stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import a hardware component called WithAuthenticator from AWS Amplify. And this component will wrap, or it will actually put an authentication flow in front of any component that you like. So for us, we want our whole app to be authenticated, so I'm just going to wrap that with Authenticator in front of the app component, save it. And I need to import that from Amplify React since that's a React component. Go back. And now we have an authentication form that lets you sign up or sign in or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and create an account. And then this has multi-factor authentication, so I should receive an email with the authentication code. Let's see if I get that. So go ahead and copy that code here, and paste it here. And now I can sign in. And that's it. Now we have authentication. So if I refresh, the state is persisted. So like if you've ever logged into an app that like Facebook where you don't ever have to log in again until you log out, that's because you're keeping the user session locally like in async storage or local storage for the web. So now that you're logged in, you don't really have to log back in. If you want to do a logout button, there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. You can actually just use a class that comes directly from Amplify called auth. So you could say import auth from AWS Amplify. And this auth class has over 30 different methods. So auth has, so this would be like for a custom authentication form. So sign in, sign up. It even has stuff for time-based one-time passwords. So if you've ever used something like Authy, you can set that up pretty easily. So there's over 30 different methods you can do to create your own. But for this purpose, I'm just going to do this second argument, include greetings. This will go ahead and just set up a really basic sign out button in our app. So now we can like sign out. So if I refresh, and this is kind of like the easiest way that I've ever done authentication. So it's like a real authentication flow. So if I go to the AWS console, oh, you know what? I can't do that right now because I'm logged out. I can't go back to the console because I'm not on a VPN. So I'm not going to worry about that. You can actually go into the AWS console and see your service, and it's there. So now that we've set up authentication.
Does that give you some sort of JWT to authenticate with your own services, or this is just saying you're logged in?
Yeah, it does. So if you want to get the JWT, we can write like a component did mount lifecycle method. And like I mentioned, this auth method has, this auth class has over 30 methods. And one of them is auth.current authenticated user. Whoops. It's a little too much autocomplete. So auth.current authenticated user. I'll go ahead and set that as a user, and then we'll just log that out. So, let me go ahead and uncomment that. Okay, so now when we go ahead and refresh, we should see that we have this user logged out. And if you go to the sign-in user session and you go to the ID token, you have all of the information here, the JWT as well as the email address, all the information about the user. So if you sign the user up with like other attributes like, I don't know, home address or favorite color, all that stuff, you could save all that and have like sign in over different devices and stuff like that.
And then you would use the access token to authenticate with other services. Yeah.
That's typically what people do. So that is basic authentication. Again, though, this pre-configured with authenticator component is really nice, but really for this we've seen people ship like some apps using this. It is configurable to some point, but in reality, most real like apps are using this auth class because it does everything we just did, but separately. So you would do something like auth.sign in, on the original sign-in, and then if you did like some type of multi-factor authentication, you would do something like auth.confirm sign-in. But a lot of times people are just building things and they want a quick authentication flow without having to write it out. This is a pretty easy way to do that. So the next cool thing that we'll look at is a GraphQL API. So
about this, where do you change the configuration of authentication to make it slightly different?
okay, so right now we're using like email, phone number, and all that. You're saying like,
Yes.
what if you want to have other? So when we created the service using the CLI, let me see if I can scroll up and find. So it looks like I cleared it out, but when we did Amplify Add API, we had two options. One was accept the pre-configured options, and the other was set up your own configuration. If we had walked through that second step, it would have actually prompted you for minimum password requirements, different attributes that were required for sign up, whether or not you want to do SMS for MFA, and things like that. So you would actually walk through the other way to set up the service, and then you could actually pass whatever values you like there.
Are there hooks for your own code for this authentication, or it is just choice from pre-configured options?
So hooks for what now?
For my own code for authentication. If I need to run my special request to database to verify something during authentication.
Oh, during authentication. So like while the user is signing up, you want to make a request to your API?
Yes.
At what step would you probably do that? Like before the MFA or something like that?
When they enter the data into the form, during login.
Oh, okay, yeah, you could easily do that. You wouldn't be able to do that using this component we use because it's too abstracted, but you could do that if you use the auth class yourself.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
So we'll go ahead and do the GraphQL API. So to do that, I'll just run Amplify Add API. And it's asking us the type of API, so we can either do a REST API or a GraphQL API. The REST API will create a Lambda function that has an Express app running in the Lambda function, and it'll also automatically set up API gateway, so we can start submitting requests to the API. So the REST API will then give you another set of choices, so you can either do just a Lambda function with an Express app, or you can do a Lambda function that interacts with a database like DynamoDB. But for us, we want to look at GraphQL. For the API name, it's going to ask me for whatever. I'm just going to choose the default Chicago Meetup. For authorization type, I'm going to start with API key, but since we've already set up authentication, we can actually protect this API using Amazon Cognito user pool. So I'm going to change that later. But for now, just to show you how to get up and running, we're going to just go with API key. What API key basically means is as long as the client has the API key, then it can send requests to the API, which essentially means it's an unprotected API. So if you have a REST API before where there's no authentication, that's kind of what this would be. So I'm going to choose API key for now. And if you already have an existing GraphQL schema, you can use it, but I don't, so I'm going to choose no. And here it's going to ask us if we'd like a guided schema creation. So if you want kind of help walking through how to create the schema, I'm going to go ahead and choose yes. And now we have two options between the type of schema or the type of like example schema that we want. We can either do a single object type with fields, which is like a really basic schema, or we can do one-to-many relationships. And really all this is going to do is just going to like give us a starter schema to work with. So I'm going to use the basic single object type of fields. And now it's going to ask us if we'd like to edit the schema. I'm going to go ahead and choose yes. So now it's going to open up the schema. So the schema that we're going to create is like pizzas, or pizza restaurants maybe, since we're in Chicago. Or pizza shops, I guess. Is that the best way is that what you call these things? I'm going to say pizza shops, ID, name, description. We'll give it a rating. It's an integer, and then we'll do like maybe a location, like a string. So this is going to be our schema. We're going to create an app that keeps up with like the best pizza shops in Chicago, and I'll go ahead and save that. And then now I hit enter, and that will go ahead and say that the resources are added successfully. Now we can go ahead and like push this up to the cloud as well. So the way we do that is run amplify push. Do we want to continue? Yes. So we now have the option to go ahead and generate all of the code we need for the actual API. So typically when you create a GraphQL API and you want to interact with it, you have to actually write your queries, mutations, subscriptions, your types, and even if you're like using mobile, like native iOS or native Android, it gets even dirtier because you end up having to write a lot of code. But now we added this thing where you can just choose yes and it'll actually auto-generate all that stuff for you. So now we're asking like where it wants to write this code to. I'm just going to choose the default. And if we want to have some type of code generation, you may not be able to see that, but it's letting us choose between TypeScript or Flow. So I'm going to choose TypeScript. And now it's asking us for the file name. You may not be able to see that either, but for the file name, I'm going to use just the default as well. And now it's asking us if we want to generate all the different possible queries, mutations, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to choose yes. So what this is doing, it's auto-generating all of the different client-side code that we would probably need. So that way you don't have to actually worry about going and figuring out how everything was set up. So now that that's created, it's actually going to take maybe a minute. So I'm going to go back to the code, and I'm going to minify some of this stuff here. So what we're going to see added is we're going to see in our left-hand folder here under source, we're going to have a new folder called GraphQL, and then we'll have 3 or 4 files in there. One's going to be the queries, one are going to be the mutations, one are going to be the subscriptions. I think we're only going to use like 1 or 2 of the actual definitions out of all those files, but it's cool just to have those there. So to interact with a GraphQL API, you typically have to have a GraphQL client. If you've ever worked with GraphQL, you probably already used Apollo or something like that. We have 2 different GraphQL clients that work with Amplify really easily. One is the API category from Amplify. That's what we're going to use now. We also have a, I guess you could call it a clone of Apollo, where we basically forked Apollo's API and a lot of their code and just wrote additional code to make it work with AppSync. And we've also added a few new features to that. So you have in the other GraphQL client that's like the Apollo client, we also have a couple of helper functions to help you create mutations and subscriptions without having to write a lot of code. But since we're already using Amplify, I'm going to use the Amplify client. But just to let you know that this isn't the only way to do it. You can also, if you've used Apollo before and you like Apollo, you can use that one. But to get started, we need to go ahead and import API and a helper called GraphQL operation. If you've ever used GraphQL tag before, it's similar to that. So we just use this as like a wrapper to wrap the operation. And then we can start actually making calls. So let me jump back again to the command line. So it looks like the API has been created, so we can start using it. That's cool. So if I go to my file here, my file structure, see that we have mutations and we have queries. For right now, when we auto-generate these, we have a requirement for GraphQL tag, but since we're not going to need GraphQL tag, and I haven't had it installed, I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. So queries. So yeah, that looks good. Oh, it looks like there's 2 S's there. That's kind of weird. I wonder if I wrote the schema wrong. Anyway.
Does it initialize with cursor-based pagination? Because you have a limit there and then a
next token.
Next token, so it's cursor based.
Yeah, basically, I guess I haven't really thought about that actually. But yeah. Yeah, so you can, I mean, you get that token back if you ask for it, and then you can pass it in as the next request to the page permission. So
It probably thinks that it is singular, what you listed, the pizza shops. It thinks it is singular and adds as to make it.
yeah, so this, yeah, exactly. So this is auto-generated, so it was like list pizza shops S. Anyway, so the first thing we need to do is probably create like a new pizza shop since we want to query for that data. So the mutation that we're going to use is create pizza shop. That takes an input. And the input, if we look at our schema, which is right here, it has two requirements, an ID and a name. So I'm really going to maybe just pass in like the name for now and maybe the description or something, because I don't want to write a whole bunch of form fields. But basically what we need to do is we need to create a form that will allow us to create items. So now that means we have a little bit of code to write. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and import this create pizza shops mutation. And this is going to be coming from GraphQL/mutations. And in our state, we want to have a couple of things. So the first thing we want to have is maybe an items array, and then we want to have a name field for the pizza shop name, and then a description field maybe for the field of description. And we want to have an onChange handler that will allow us to have like a text input. That's just going to call this .setState, passing in the name and the value. And then now we can actually write the GraphQL mutation. So this is kind of going to be how you can interact with the GraphQL API. So what we'll do is we'll create a create pizza shop method. And the first thing we'll do is we'll create a pizza shop variable that will basically contain the name and the description. Zoom out a little bit. Is that okay to read there, or is that too small for some people on the back?
It's a little small.
It is, yeah.
Just zoom in a little bit.
Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks.
So we have this variable here. Let me make this a couple of lines here. So we have this pizza shop variable. What we can do now is we can call API.GraphQL, pass in the GraphQL operation, and then the create pizza shops and the actual pizza shop variable. And this is going to be an asynchronous function, so we'll do async. And then we'll just do await here. And then we can just say console.log pizza shop created. And the last thing we need to do is create a form for that. So we'll just have like two input fields. One will be for the name and one will be for the description. Okay, so that's really about it. So we have the form, we have the method, and we have the function that's going to be called when we click on the button. So let's go ahead and try that out. Let me go to Mutations and see if we're using GraphQL. So let me go ahead and install that GQL package. So it's arguing about it. It looks like I'm actually asking for GQL, so let me go back to mutation. Oh, there we go.
Are you able to really edit that backend schema too?
Which part of it?
Well, you pulled it up, but like if we wanted to implement our own directives or
Oh yeah, totally. You can just make changes and then it'll give you the update when you do Amplify push. So we have the form here. Let me just try this out. Looks like I have an error. Let me check what's going on here. Oh, okay, I think I know the issue here. I need to have an input variable here. Whereas, I think, well, let me make sure. So let me rewrite this mutation actually to be a little different. Or maybe just let me try to rewrite this object here. Okay, cool. So it looks like that worked. We created our first pizza shop. The mutation called for an argument of input. I had to just update the pizza shop to have an input value. So now let's go ahead and query for the data. So in the component did mount lifecycle method, I'm going to go ahead and do the API.GraphQL call again. And instead of passing in the mutation, we need to pass in the query. So the query is going to be the list pizza shops query. So let me just copy and paste that here. And import it here. And I'll go ahead and assign that to a variable called pizza shops, and I'll go ahead and log that out. So now, right here, we have the pizza shop data logged out, and we have an items array with one item for now. So I'm going to go ahead and query for this. And it looks like since we don't have a location and don't have a rating, it's just coming up null, which is fine. We do have the description and the name. So what we can do is just map over the data in our state, or in our render method, I'm sorry. So we'll just say this dot state dot pizza shops dot map. So if I save that, okay, I don't think I never saved that to state, so let me go ahead and do that first. So I think I need to log out the data one more time before I do that. So pizza shops.data.list pizza shops.items. Oh, and also I think I named the pizza shops as items in the state, so let me fix that. So in the component did mount lifecycle method, we're getting this data back. So I just need to call this .set state, updating the items to be the same data structure that we're getting back. Okay, so that seems to work, so I can just uncomment this. Fix that variable reference to items. Live coding, sorry. All right, so we have the data coming back. So that's mutations and queries, and then the last thing that you might be familiar with, and one of the reasons that a lot of people use GraphQL is the real time. So that in GraphQL, the real time is implemented using subscriptions. So if you've worked with Apollo, the subscriptions are typically set up in the, I think there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can either have a render prop, or you can actually set up the subscription in a hardware component and pass it down as a prop. With the Amplify CLI, or the Amplify library, the way that we do that is we subscribe to the data changing in component did mount, and then we basically have a function that gets called every time any data changes. And I'm going to go ahead to the Amplify documentation. And I'm going to go to JavaScript, API, and I'm going to go ahead and search for subscriptions. I'm just going to copy and paste the stuff that we have there. So to set up the subscription, I'm going to go to component did mount. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of some of this code we're not using. And the function that we're going to call is API.GraphQL. And we're going to pass in the GraphQL operation, kind of like we did before. But we're then going to call a .subscribe function. And then every time the data comes back, we'll just be able to console.log the data for now. And for the actual subscription definition, we already have that definition defined. It was auto-generated for us. So let's go to subscriptions. And the subscription that we want is this on create pizza shops subscription. So I'll go ahead and just import this. So that's already kind of already written for us. So here where we do our imports, I'll just add that one. And I'll pass that here. And for the console.log, I'm going to do subscription data. And we'll just log that out for now. So hopefully we can kind of open up two windows. And when we make a change to our data, we see it show up in both. For now, it's just logged out, but later on we'll actually see it rendered in both. I think I have some here real quick. So GPL is not defined. So I'm going to go ahead and open the inspector here. I don't really care about seeing any of that stuff. So now if we create some data, we're hoping that subscription is going to fire on the right-hand side. So now we have the subscription data. So now the subscription is actually coming through. That's good. And the data that we want is the value.data.onCreate pizza shops. So now to actually make it show up in our UI, we can just update the state. So we can call this.setState, or we can go ahead and create a copy of the items menu variable. And then we can actually pass in the event data .value .data .onCreate pizza shops, and then we can just call this.setState, passing in the new items. So the subscription gets triggered or gets subscribed or created here. And then every time a new piece of data comes down, this next function gets fired. We update the array of items with the new data, and then we just call set state. And then now we should be able to go ahead and try this out. So if I create an item here, you see the subscription here. We can do the same thing here. So that's kind of, and then we probably could do a little bit better on the optimistic response, because right now when we add a new item, it takes like a minute to show up, or not a minute, but like a second to show up on the actual component we're working in. Typically what you would do, you would implement an optimistic response to make it show up right away and then filter it out when the subscription came through. But we're not going to worry about that right now. So, okay, yeah, so that's kind of the GraphQL part. Does anyone have any questions on the GraphQL part?
Yeah, if you start using subscriptions, does that put you like on a different tier of service, or how do you pay for that versus like a standard GraphQL implementation?
So it's all part of the requests, the number of requests I think that you're going to be using. If you look at the pricing, we have a few different scenarios where different implementations are kind of like created and tested over a certain number of users that give you like an idea of how much it would cost to use. So there's a free tier for AppSync. I think it's something around 1 million requests for free. And then after that, there's a certain pricing tier. We did like a test, the most recent one that I know of, we did a test for like an app with like 50,000 users, 5 minutes a day per user. And over the course of a month, it was like $23 or something like that. But the details of that are also on the pricing page for AppSync.
And is like a push over a subscription similar to a request?
So no, it's actually not, because all that happens there is we create a WebSocket when the subscription gets created, and then the data is just passed to the WebSocket, so it's not as expensive as a regular request, to the best of my knowledge.
Huh. Thank you.
Sure.
Can you override this subscription resolver to filter out who gets the message?
Yes, you can do that in the resolver. So we haven't looked at the actual resolver code. So if you've ever worked with GraphQL, the resolver is the glue between the schema, which includes the queries, the mutations, and the schema, and the subscriptions, all that stuff in the data source. If you go into, I can't go into my account right this second because I'm not logged in, but if you go into your AppSync account and you open the API that we just created, you'll see a set of resolvers that were already generated for you for all these different operations. You can actually change the resolver. There's two parts to the resolver. There's the request. So the request is the data coming in that gets sent to the data source. And then there's the response. So there's a request template and a response template. I think, what was your question again on you were talking about subscription? So that would probably
so like how would you?
So that would probably be on the response, I think, template. You might do that, but yeah. But we're gonna I'll show how to do. The next thing we'll do real quick, because we're almost out of time, is show how to turn this API into an authenticated, authorized API using.
Cool.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you edit the resolver in Amplify and push it? You have to do it.
Yes, yeah, you can edit it in Amplify. So to edit the resolver, we can go into the API, build resolvers, and here we see all of our resolvers. That's a pretty big one, so let me show you a better one. There we go. Let me see, so create actually isn't that complicated, but I don't know, let me see if we added some extra stuff to that. So all this stuff is like, actually doesn't need to be there, and this kind of doesn't need to be there, but this is kind of what a resolver request mapping template looks like. Put item, we pass in the key, and then all of the data is the actual input. So we have a key and an attribute value. Attribute value is object. This object just contains In our scenario, it would be the name, the description, the location, all that stuff. And then this gets mapped to DynamoDB, and DynamoDB will create a new item that will have all of the values that we passed in created for you there. But actually, it might be, I may need to go ahead and log into this to set up the authentication. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. I just have to go ahead and use my, oh wow, let me log in. Okay, I thought I needed to get my MFA token, so it doesn't look like it. So I created this in USSE 2, so it's Ohio. So I'm going to go to AppSync in the dashboard, and here has all the different APIs that I've created. So the one that I want is this like Chicago meetup one here. So I'll go there. And right now, if I go to settings, I have the authentication type as API key, but I want to change that to Amazon Cognito user pool. And I'm going to go to region, and I want to update this to US East 2, because I created that new authentication in US East 2. And for the user pool, I don't know what that is right now, so let me go back to my command line. And to get information about your Amplify setup, you can run the Amplify status command. And this should give us the resource name for auth. So it's something like 045FE. So it's that one. And then for the default action, I'm going to choose allow. And I'm going to go ahead and choose save. So what this basically did, it just changed our setting from being a regular Amplify, regular AppSync authentication type of API key to now being using our setup for our auth that we created earlier. So that's the step one. The next step we need to do is, if we go to our initial configuration that we created, you go ahead and close some of this stuff. If we go to AWS exports, the authentication type we have here is API key. We actually want this to be Amazon Cognito user pools. So there's a couple of ways that we can do that. We can probably, there's a few different ways that we can do that actually, but let me go ahead and open up index.js and just do this the quick and dirty way. So when we pass in this amplify.configure, we're just passing in that config. I want to override this setting here for authentication type. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this. And I'm going to go ahead and put the type that is the Cognito user pool. And I can't remember what that is, so I'm going to have to go to an API key here. And that is this right here. So I'll just paste that there. And now our GraphQL client is recognizing that when we authenticate, when we make requests to the API, we want to use the logged in user using this Cognito setup that we have. So I can save that. And to make sure this is working, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the resolver to store the user reference in the database. And to do that, we can go to the resolvers and just change the request mapping template for create item. So if I go to mutations, and I find the create resolver, and the request mapping template here, we have a little bit going on at first. If here we're doing some addition to the input object. So when the object gets passed to this request mapping template, it's probably going to have the name and the description, and then maybe the location and the rating. We're adding a created at, an updated at, a type name, and then we're auto-generating an ID as well. So we want to add one more field. We want to add a username. So now we can say we want to add to the input, we want to add username. And we can now check for the user by saying context.identity.username. And that's it. Go ahead and save that. And this is going to now recognize the username of the login user. So I'll go here to save. So that's saved. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out. Log back in. Create a new item. With a username, maybe I'll call this. So now when we go to our database, which we can do by going to the actual AppSync API, clicking on data sources, and then clicking on the resource name right here. When we view our items, we should now see that new item have a new property of username. So now whenever someone creates anything, you have access to the user in that resolver. So this is kind of how you would do fine-grained access control. This is how you would do authorization in some scenarios. You would do things like, if you wanted to only get data for that user, you could now have access to the username in the resolver. So that would be like the context identity dot whatever. So yeah, that's kind of the quick setup on that. But any questions about authentication or anything like that? There are a couple of, there are three main ways I see people using AppSync with authentication. There's API key for open APIs, and then the two most common use cases for authenticated APIs are either what we just did here, or people are using OpenID Connect, which allows you to take Auth0 or any existing authentication provider, and then kind of do what we just did, but using whatever authentication provider you want other than AWS.
I think this was sort of asked before, but if you edit the resolver from the dashboard in AWS, how does another team member pull that change down?
That's something we don't have yet. Everything probably needs to be updated locally. Yeah, but we released the Amplify CLI a few weeks ago. We have a lot of major updates that we need to do, stuff like that, to make it better, and that isn't done yet. So what we have coming up is you can just do an Amplify pull, and any changes in any of the services will just pull down locally for you.
Yeah. Because otherwise, would like a request edit to that resolver, if you did Amplify push, would that overwrite what was in
It would kind of get out of sync, and I don't know if it would error out or if it would work and overwrite. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
So
Are your schemas versioned, or?
yes, so you can have version schemas right now. It's documented like how to do that in the documentation. So. All right. Any other questions? A couple other things that we haven't gone over: VR and AR. That takes a while because you have to actually do Sumerian and a bunch of other stuff. Storage, we're not going to really go over that. I would say that the three the main things that people are using the CLI for so far are authentication, APIs, and for storage. So if you're looking to do any of that stuff, maybe give it a shot and see if you like it. So, but that's it, I think, for my presentation. I'm going to be hanging around for at least another 30 minutes or so if anyone wants to talk or anything like that. So, yeah, thank you for having me.